Many of you know Sir Michael Barber, who's up here on the stage with me because he was here last year and spoke to all of you and gave you some wonderful insights from his experiences in the United Kingdom, where he was Tony Blair's deputy in charge of helping him deliver on his entire domestic policy agenda. Many of you have probably read his book, heard him speak elsewhere, hopefully had a chance to meet with him and gotten the sense of just how incredible he is and how his experiences could be so helpful to us back here in the States. And what I'm really thrilled about is since last year's meeting, Michael has been spending a lot of time through his work with McKinsey, with us at Achieve, and also with our partner organization, Education Trust, at trying to figure out how we could take his lessons and strategies that he used overseas and adapt them for you to use right here in the United States in our education systems, both at the K-12 and the higher education level, to help deliver on these very ambitious standards and expectations that you're setting at both levels. And we're very pleased, and we'll tell you after this session what our plans are for moving forward, but we're very, very pleased to tell you that we've got a real great opportunity in store for both K-12 and higher education systems to take advantage of this expertise, not only for the next 2 hours, this is kind of a sneak preview, but moving forward, our goal is to really launch something new that you can all benefit from if you're interested. So as you pay attention and engage in this next couple hours, keep in mind that this hopefully is only the beginning. So Michael, I've already mentioned and introduced, and you probably already have seen him and know him, but you may not know his two colleagues, Richard Page Jones and Simon Rhee, also from Great Britain. Michael will tell you more about them, but they were colleagues together, developed a lot of this work together, and have been working very hard to help us think about how to transport this knowledge and experience right here into the United States education system. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Michael Barber, and please join me in welcoming all three of them.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, Matt, thank you very much indeed for the introduction, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you, and thanks to Achieve for organising what I'm sure everybody in the room thinks is an absolutely fabulous event. One of the reasons I've been very excited to spend quite a lot of time in the United States over the last 12 months since we met before is this is an incredible moment in American educational history. This is a huge opportunity. This is a 2-year opportunity to really get to the next level of performance in a dramatic way. And what I sense in this room is I'm actually in awe of the sense of passion that I've heard over the last day and a half, and indeed the depth of expertise gathered in this room. I remember John F. Kennedy, when he was president, had all the Nobel Prize winners together for a dinner, and he said, this is the greatest gathering of expertise in the White House since Jefferson dined alone. And I'm not sure what the equivalent is in this case, but anyway, it's a fabulous set of expertise. And we three, good, strong colleagues and friends, are somewhat anxious and conscious of the depth of our ignorance by comparison with all of you. We're hoping that our British accents will give us a spurious credibility. I think that might last for 2 hours. I'm not sure it'll be on there. Over the last 2 days, we've heard a lot collectively, haven't we, about the federal government's intentions from Joanne's fantastic presentation yesterday about how to win the political and public arguments about this very tough agenda that you've all taken on, and about getting the content of the standards right at a level of detail, which is also really important. And these are all very, very difficult things to do. And what I want you to imagine now is supposing you succeed, supposing you get the standards established, as some of you have already made real progress with, supposing you win the political argument, win the public argument, supposing the federal government gets its act together, and suddenly you've succeeded. When I was a professor in the university, I used to mock gently my colleagues in the professoriate by saying, there's only one thing worse when you're a professor than having your idea ignored, and that's having it taken seriously. And supposing your idea that you've been working on for a decade is taken seriously, then having overcome the huge challenges that I've just described, you're going to be faced with the awesome, possibly even more difficult challenge of implementing that agenda. And by implementation, I mean so that it affects every student in every classroom in your state. So getting it through the legislature, getting it adopted, getting sufficient public support to win the argument is a tough challenge. But making sure that it affects outcomes, affects day-to-day interactions between teachers and students in every classroom is a huge challenge. And that's what this session is about. So we're making the assumption that all of that other stuff has been done, and now you're faced with implementation. How would you go about that? Well, we three faced a similar challenge back in 2001 when Tony Blair won his second election victory, and he asked me to set up a thing called the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit. And our job was to secure implementation of his 20 biggest domestic policy priorities. And some of you were here last year when I presented about how we did that. And they were big, difficult things: making the trains run on time, cutting crime by 30%, increasing test scores in elementary and secondary schools, reducing the amount of time people had to wait for elective surgery. All of these things were very, very tough, very ambitious targets. Blair was a very ambitious politician. So we agreed to take, I agreed to take on that mission, and then I recruited people who really knew what they were doing, Simon and Richard and a small number of others. And we set about doing that task. And Simon and Richard led the work on education, which is why they're particularly appropriate for this session, but they also worked right across the portfolio of challenges that we'd taken on. And I can tell you that 4 years of working with them was one of the greatest pleasures I've ever experienced. So it's great to be working with them again. The short version of our story, for those of you who missed it last year, is it worked. It didn't work perfectly. We did have some problems, but it made a significant difference. We delivered about 80% of these hugely demanding targets. And Blair said it was the best reform he made of the government machine while he was Prime Minister. And since then, it's been replicated in places like Holland, Malaysia, Australia, Canada, Los Angeles even. So lots of people have taken on this methodology, and it seems to work. And we want to show you how that methodology might apply to your challenge of meeting college and career-ready standards for the students in your schools. So for the purposes of the simulation that we're going to take you through over the next 2 hours, you'll understand that we had to simplify it. In 2 hours, we can't take you through all the complexities of it, but we do hope we can show in a kind of dynamic way how you might apply the methods that we developed to the challenges that all of you face. And to do that, we've built a model, and we've built a model of a state called Everyman State. We've plugged the student data into it, and we've got the demographics into it. And for added authenticity today, we brought the British weather with us. So that's the model that we've created for you. And in addition to showing how this state progresses towards achieving college and career-ready graduation for a very high proportion of its students, we've also calculated what impact that would have if they were successful on the GDP of that state beyond that, which hopefully will help you win some of the public arguments in your states. So that's what we've got done so far. Now, let me just tell you about the agenda. That first thing we've just done, that was the bit that I just did. And then we're going to talk to you about establishing goals, getting trajectories, and getting the routines. That's the first part of what we're going to do. Then we're going to have a section where we talk about, well, supposing you do all that, and supposing even in spite of all that, it doesn't quite work as you expected. And the real world is like that, as we all know. So what do you do if you're falling behind is the second theme. Then we want to say, supposing you succeed, what will the impact be, what I've just been talking about. And then right at the end, we'll talk about how this might interact with your agenda beyond this morning's session. You can imagine that when we established the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit back in 2001, and it's still going, by the way, with other great people doing the work now, that not everybody in the vast British bureaucracy was enthused about it. They said, who are these people from the Prime Minister coming to check up on us or drive us? We're perfectly competent doing what we're doing, even though the results didn't necessarily show that. So there was some sceptical reaction, although I must say we overcame that, generally speaking. But at the beginning, they had a variety of ways of mocking us, and one of them was to call the techniques that we developed collectively, to call them deliverology. So this was a mocking term, but in order to turn it around on them, we just accepted it and called it deliverology. And we're hoping that one day deliverology will appear in the dictionary. And deliverology is a noun, as it says there. It's a systematic process for driving progress and delivering results, particularly in large public bureaucracies. And what it does is, it's a very simple thing, and as we know, all the best techniques for getting things done are simple things done rigorously. Basically what it does is enable you, with real rigor and depth, to answer these questions. What are you trying to do? How are you trying to get it done? At any given moment, do you know whether you're on track to achieve what you've set out to do? And if you're not on track, what are you going to do about it? And basically, big change in public systems only needs answers to those 4 questions. There's nothing else to it, really. And we're going to take you through some of that agenda. This is Everyman State. It'll be very familiar to you because you're all on this agenda. They used to have requirements like those on the right-hand side of the page, but now they've adopted college and career-ready standards. They have had Mike Cohen testify before the legislature. He got a pretty hard time, but he came through, and the legislature decided to adopt these standards, and the standards are in place. And this is now what is expected of every student in the state. So, they set a target. They're not happy in Everyman State just to say, we've adopted the standards. They want to set a target for how many students should achieve those standards by a certain date. So they take 2017. They say, by then we want 90% cohort graduation rate, but we want 80% college and career-ready graduation rate. And in addition to those pretty ambitious targets, they want to halve the achievement gap over the time between now and then. So they're not just adopting the standards and leaving it there. That's the starting point of saying, right, now how are we going to get the vast majority of students in our state to achieve those standards? They have a kind of demographic pattern that'll be familiar to many of you. They have 33% of their students are underrepresented minorities, 33% are low income, and so on. And when you look on the left-hand side of the slide as you look at it, what you will see is that is reflected in that demographic pattern is reflected in the graduation rates, where if you look at the average, which is the 70% bar, all students, you'll see that the vast majority of them are, well, 49 out of that are achieving them, but for the underrepresented minorities, achievement levels, and the dark green is achieving at high standards, at college and career-ready standards, is much lower than anybody would want it to be if they believed in equity and they believed in high standards for all students. So the pattern of this state is they've got college and career-ready standards, they've got some demographic challenges in terms of the achievement gap, and they've set a target to halve that gap and achieve high standards for 80% of all the students by 2017. So they work out how many students do we need to graduate at those rates by 2017. They project that there will be 102,100 students in the 2017 cohort. They know that because those children have already been born. They multiply it by 90% to get to the 91,900. And for the 80% college and career-ready graduation, they multiply it by the 80% target, and they work out that they've got to get 81,700 students to standards in that year. Okay, simple math so far. For underrepresented minorities, the challenge is greater because they're going to halve the achievement gap. So the ratio of non-disadvantaged students to advantaged students has to go from 0.4 to 0.7. And they use a simple piece of maths that wouldn't even be in Algebra 2 to work out that means they need 9,700, there are 9,700 underrepresented students achieving that now, and they need to get it to 23,100 by the target year. So they've got to get a 13,500 increase. They do that for all the different underrepresented groups. I won't take you through the calculation. And they work out what they've got to do, not just to achieve their 2017 targets for cohort and college and career-ready graduation, but exactly which students they've got to shift to get to the halving of the achievement gap. So now they know what the challenge is. They then draw a very simple trajectory with a straight line. They say, where are we now? That's 70% and 49%. they say they start with their trajectory in 2013, which is the first graduating class, and they track it through, and they have their trajectory. So from where they've got to be, where they think they're going to be in 2013 to where they've got to be in 2017. So now they have the beginnings of a trajectory. Their baseline is a long way from the goal. They are, if they just current, or what they anticipate to be performance in 2013, which is based on performance in 2008, that's their baseline. The gap between that and the college and career ready goal, and I'm just focusing on that for the purposes of simplicity, though we could look at all the others as well, the model would do that. They've got a 32,200 student gap. So somehow between 2013 and 2017, they've got to change the way their system operates to get 32,200 extra graduations. They've got a couple of interventions already functioning in their state. One is early warning indicators. Some of you are familiar with these. Another is Saturday Academies. And they've got some idea of what impact they will have. It's not a perfect science, but they've looked at the research. They've looked at what happens in their own system. They've looked at other systems. And they work out that if they do those things really well, they'll get an 8,700 increase in their graduation rate by 2017. So that's their existing interventions. We'll add them 8,700. They haven't started doing these, but they're already in the pipeline and they're going to happen. So that narrows their gap to just 23,500 extra students. So now they know not just what their baseline will do, but what their planned interventions will give them by 2017. Again, it's not a perfect science, but it's all about working out what the gap is and what you have to do about it. They then say, well, that is quite a big gap, 23,500 students, far too many to be complacent about. We can't just let the system unfold. We need to do some serious thinking about how we would narrow that gap. And they use 5 types of benchmarking to get to the answer of what do we do about those 23,500 students. First of all, they benchmark within their system. They look at the districts in the state. They look at the high schools in the state and they say, which ones are doing well and which ones are doing less well? And the ones that are doing well, what are they doing? What programs do they have in the districts and high schools that are doing better than the average? We've benchmarked all of our system, and we find that some of them are doing some programs that if we applied them statewide would make a significant difference. They do another type of benchmarking. They say, in the past when we faced challenges like this and succeeded, what did we do? And they come up with some more ideas. Then they look at the other 49 states and they say, well, what are they doing? Some of the other states are doing better than us. What are they doing on this issue? How do they do it? Let's call the state chief or go to the SSO and get some advice, whatever it is. But they're benchmarking their system against other systems. They know that you can't just copy things, but they also know that you've got to learn rigorously from the other systems in the United States. Then they say, well, what about the rest of the world? The rest of the world seems to do pretty well, or parts of the rest of the world seem to do pretty well on some of these things. How do they do it? So that's the 4th type of benchmarking. And then they say there might be some bits of this that aren't to do with education systems, that to do with other systems altogether, but nevertheless have lessons for us. For example, a hotel chain, one of the posh hotel chains not long ago, wanted to work out how to improve the process from when you arrive at a hotel in a taxi to when you get into your room, having gone through the check-in process. They broke it into 16 steps. And they said, who does each of these individual steps really well? So who does, when you arrive at a posh hotel and the taxi or the cab arrives, somebody opens the door for you. Who's really, really good? Who's best in the world at opening the door of a taxi? Turns out the answer is the people at the Oscars ceremony. They really know how to do that. So you apply that. And you do the same for the other 15 now. So there may be elements of getting this right that aren't to do with education systems. They're to do with other organizations that do similar things. And as a result of that, they actually come up with a pretty good program. They work out that to close their gap, and here we're just taking maths, but we could have done it for English as well, that those who are not part of a subgroup going through this pipeline that you're all very familiar with, about 75 to 80% of students make it through. But of the subgroup, they've got an appalling dropout rate along the process, so only 25 to 30%. So they want to know, as a result of this benchmarking, they've got to do something different about that. And one of the things they come up with is if they add extended learning time. If they add extended learning time, which they've found from benchmarking against the other states, the second type of benchmarking, they can do that systematically. They will get 3,600 additional graduates by the 2017 goal. And they do that for a whole set of other programs, and they come up with an agenda of all these things that they're going to do. They combine them into a kind of delivery program, the things they're going to do coordinated across the state, and they realize that that will give them 24,500 extra graduations by the target date if they do those things really well. And now the target looks achievable. So they've got their baseline, they've got their planned interventions, they've got 5 or 6 other interventions that they've done by benchmarking, learning from all of you, learning from the rest of the world, learning from hotel chains, whatever it might be. There it is. So they're on target. Now, the question that we faced in the delivery unit for Prime Minister Blair when we were looking at railways and health systems and crime and all those other things that we were dealing with was how to get this kind of trajectory building concept into the lifeblood of the way the bureaucracy worked. Richard, how did we do that?
Thank you, Michael. That rather easy question. And thank you for the invitation to come and share with you some of our experiences in the Blair government and to help think through whether these approaches might be useful in your specific context. Michael said, how do we do trajectories? Well, what we did was to ask our government departments to look at where they were at the moment, and that's that joggy little line on the left-hand side, a sort of flat line in terms of their performance. Look at where they wanted to get to, which is the star up there, and then to say, okay, so what's the impact of your policy going to be in those intermediate years, and where do you think you're going to be on the midpoints along that line? And when we asked them that question, most of our departments used an incredibly sophisticated device called a trajectory gradient tool, otherwise known as a ruler, and drew a straight line from where they are now to their goal. But of course, in reality, trajectories are highly unlikely to follow the straight line, and every man's trajectories therefore need another hard think. They could look like that, actually, where you put policies and interventions in place and you get a lot of early wins, and it becomes increasingly difficult to drive out the gains as you get nearer and nearer to your target. We had a target in England in 2001 for our emergency rooms. You call them, I think, we call it A&E departments, emergency rooms, that no one should wait for more than 4 hours. Everyone should be treated and either discharged or go into a hospital bed within that 4-hour period. Now, on that one, we worked out with DH that the trajectory ought to look quite like that, actually, because there are quite a lot of people who come in with cuts, bruises, burns. They can be out of the door very, very quickly, actually. No reason they should be waiting a long time. So there's some easy wins to be had in the system. But later on, when you're dealing with people who've got quite serious diagnostic issues or you need to find a hospital bed for them, it becomes much more difficult to get nearer and nearer to your 100% mark. And I think some of the education targets are probably a bit like this. And maybe getting those last 5% of people through Algebra 2 might be quite a challenge and might be, take quite a time in order to do that. Trajectories could also look like that, where actually it's pretty hard. There are some time lags in the system, and it's pretty hard to get those early wins. And actually, a lot of your gains come from later on in the lifetime of your policy. We had another health policy, which was that no one should wait more than 18 weeks between being referred by their doctor, their GP, and actually going into hospital for treatment. That's a very bold and ambitious target. And on that one, we also produced a trajectory with DH which looked like the bottom line. Because before they could actually shorten waiting times, they had to clear out a whole lot of people who'd been waiting for an awful long time before they could ensure they achieved the 18-week target for that group of people. So,
say that we were a bit suspicious of those bottom ones generally because you had an official producing them in 2001 and the first rise is in 2005 when they're expecting to be in another job.
Yes, that was the case. And the other thing about the bottom trajectory, it's a pretty nerve-wracking experience because you don't get your gains, your big gains, until you're quite near the target date. So it's quite a nerve-wracking experience, and you have to be very clear about where you are on the system. And actually, some aspects of your targets, every man state's targets might be like that, where if you do work with freshmen, you're not going to have any change in graduation rates for at least 4 years. So there's time lags built into the system. So I sort of think that every man's state trajectory might be a sort of combination of those two lines. But I think every man's state needs to do a bit more work to work that out. But it is really important, because look at the difference between the top and the bottom line, and look at the degree of confidence you'd have if you weren't there. So it's really important to know where you're on this line. It's not easy. Producing these trajectories is actually really hard. You need very good data. It's not a precise science. You can't predict exactly what the impact will be, but it needs a good, sound professional judgment to help put you in the right place. So it's tough. You need good data. You also need to do it for the subgroups of students whom you're particularly interested to check that they're on the trajectories they need to be on. So it was a tough job, but it was really important, vitally important that we did this, and it was a vital part of the delivery toolkit that we use for keeping Blair in touch and for tracking and monitoring progress that Simon's going to talk about now.
Thanks, Richard. Good morning, everyone. Also delighted to be here. Routines. The delivery unit developed over time a set of routines to monitor and drive progress. And 3 key routines that it developed, which were different in frequency and nature, but shared some common aims. And they were designed to monitor and drive progress, to keep the Prime Minister informed in a time-efficient way, and also to identify barriers and try and fix them and identify solutions. The most frequent of our routines was the monthly note to the Prime Minister. This was a short written report, 1 or 2 sides, covering a set of data, and it reported progress against the trajectory. It set out what needed to be done with a set of solutions, and also said to the Prime Minister personally what action you might need to take. And it was a pretty symbolic moment when you, as a member of the delivery unit, received back your note from the Prime Minister with a handwritten response, acknowledging what needed to be done and signalling the way forward. And as you can see from the slide, every man's state here has decided to adopt 3 routines, and the first of those is a monthly note to the Chief State Schools Officer reporting on progress. The second major routine that we developed in the delivery unit was the regular 3 monthly meetings between the Prime Minister and the relevant Cabinet Minister and their officials, and in my case they were from the Department of Education, and we call them delivery stocktakes. They were face-to-face engagements round the Cabinet table, and they had a focused agenda with a presentation on data from the delivery unit to set up the discussion. And this really was the Prime Minister personally holding Cabinet Ministers and officials directly to account for progress. And each stocktake was a pretty significant event for the delivery unit team, and for Michael as well, because of the opportunity that it offered to drive progress, also to identify barriers, the personal time with the PM, but also because our analysis of what were the key priorities in any given situation was really on the line for that discussion. In the example we've had here of every man's state, they've decided to have 2 sets of stocktakes. Firstly, for the state chief to interrogate progress against statewide interventions, and then secondly, for a stocktake addressing the performance of major districts and their performance against expectations. The third routine that we used in the delivery unit was the delivery report, and this was a twice-yearly report produced by the delivery unit, analysing performance against trajectory, identifying key barriers which needed to be addressed, and also then setting out a programme of work for the next 6 months, including specifically what the delivery unit was going to offer and how it would support and challenge. At the same time as writing the delivery report, we'd also use our assessment framework, and more about that in a moment, to make traffic light judgments against all the key 20 national targets, which Michael said at the beginning we were working on. And those traffic light judgments allowed us then to rank in a single league table on a single page all of the Prime Minister's key priorities, from reducing health waiting times, improving train punctuality, raising standards in schools, and reducing crime, on one single page. And it was an intensely powerful tool for the Prime Minister and also for departments to compare their performance.
Simon, I just wanted, while you're on that, first of all, before I come to the question, you have in your conference pack what I believe in America is called a zip drive. In the British government, we call it a security risk. But anyway, everything you're seeing on the slides is on here, and a whole lot more, actually, including the assumptions behind the model. So you've got all the data. By all means, make notes, but I meant to tell you at the beginning that we had this. Now, what I'd really like to hear from both of you, actually, question one to you, Simon. What made a monthly note a good note? How did you know you'd been really effective with your note to the Prime Minister?
I think that the clarity of the presentation, the crispness, the conciseness of the report with the data as well, I think identifying progress and then crucially saying what needed to be done to address the barriers, and then I think also personally saying to the Prime Minister, and this is what we would like you to do about it. Or indeed, this is what we're going to do about it, and we want your endorsement as well.
Yeah, because what we found, I think, was that if you're the Prime Minister, you've got a lot of things to worry about all the time, and that our job was not to just give him something more to worry about, but to tell him how we were going to solve it and then get his agreement that that was the solution. So Margaret Thatcher said about one of her cabinet ministers, the others bring me problems, he brings me solutions. And we wanted to be the people who brought the Prime Minister solutions. And Richard, what about a stock take? What made a stock take effective? And what happened to those health targets, by the way?
On HBC, yeah. Three things I think about a stock take. One is really, really good, clear presentation, a trajectory, and where progress is against that trajectory to actually really sharpen the debate. A bit of edge, Michael, I think. You know, the Prime Minister seriously challenging his Secretary of State and his senior officials. Where are you? Why aren't you there? What are you going to do about it? And needing to be really convinced that they were on the right place. And thirdly, I think some really clear actions to say, okay, we know where we are now, what are we going to do about it? And get some agreement by people in that.
Did you ever see Blair bang the table and shout at anyone?
I didn't see him bang the table and shout at anyone, but I was in a very edgy stock take. It was the 18-week one, actually, where as we got nearer and nearer, we were less convinced. So steep was the climb. We were not convinced they were going to achieve the target by the target time. And we said that. And the chief exec of the National Health Service who was in the room said, oh, yes, I will. And there was quite a sort of edgy exchange. But he did go away. And he made sure, he'd put his reputation on the line with the PM. He went away and he made sure it happened. And actually, in 2007, we did deliver, at the end of 2007, delivered the waiting time target that no one in England will wait more than 18 weeks between being referred by their GP and actually having their operation. And as I left the PMDU, I tested this out because I had a knee replacement. 13 and a half weeks, which I thought was fantastic, actually. And the other message is, don't believe everything that people from England tell you about our health system, because you don't have to wait long periods of time.
Okay, Simon.
The assessment framework that I mentioned, this is it. This is the assessment framework that we used in the delivery unit. There are 5 key metrics. I'll just briefly explain what we did. We measured degree of challenge. We said, actually, how difficult is the target to achieve? We recognise they're all pretty demanding, but some were clearly more demanding than others, and we rated them from low challenge to very high. And for example, Everyman State, their 2 goals that Michael told you about, they look pretty high challenge to us at this point in the story. The second judgment was about the quality of planning and performance management to make progress to the overall goal. The third judgment, capacity to drive progress. This was a judgment about the capacity across the whole delivery chain, as we called it, to deliver the target. And that meant for us, right the way from central government down to individual schools, was the commitment, the capability and the leadership there in order to drive progress. And for both quality of planning and capacity, we made judgments against a 4-point traffic light scale from red, it requires urgent and decisive action, or green, systematic refinement and implementation. The fourth judgment was about stage of delivery. Again, a 4-point scale. Where are you from stage 1, policy implementation right at the start, to stage 4, irreversible progress? I have to say, we probably didn't have very many stage 4s.
Can I just mention, in Britain, the traffic lights have 3 colours, like in the United States. And the middle one is, you call it yellow, we call it amber. But the reason we split it is social science research tells you that if you have a 3-point scale, everybody chooses the middle one. So we forced them to split. If the amber bit had to be either amber red or amber green, and then we can group it and say which ones need attention and which ones are basically on track.
The final metric, overall likelihood of delivery. So we used the 4 judgments we'd already come up with and performance against trajectory to say, actually, how likely is it that this target will be reached within the timescale prescribed? And we made those judgments every 6 months for all the key targets we were working on to report both to the Prime Minister and to departments. And it was really interesting for me personally to sit in the room and listen to Joanne yesterday about the criteria that she's going to use to judge your race to the top proposals, and hear quality of planning, I think, and capacity to execute it was as two of the key criteria. So, in our example, Everyman State here decides it's going to use the assessment framework to judge 9 of its key programs against the 5 metrics that I've explained, and then the final column there to rank them in terms of the likelihood of getting where they need to get to. Right. You've heard from us, you've heard about Everyman State, and now is an opportunity for you to reflect and do some consideration on your tables. What we'd like you to do is to have a think and have a discussion about 2 questions that we got there up on the screen. Firstly, how useful would this process of trajectory setting and creating routines be in reaching your career readiness goals? Second question, how challenging would trajectory building and creating and establishing similar routines, and by routines, I mean the 3 routines that I've just talked about, the monthly written report, the quarterly conversation face-to-face, and the 6 monthly written report. How challenging might they be to establish in your states? We'd like to give you 10 minutes on your tables, either across the table or in your states, to have a focused conversation about those 2 questions. You need to cover both questions, please, because once you've finished, after 10 minutes, we'd like you to vote individually, and there is some equipment that we'll explain in a minute about how you're going to do that. So 10 minutes on your tables, a conversation about those 2 questions, please.
Time to vote, please. I used to be a high school teacher, so I know how to deal with tough bunches like you guys. So it's time to vote.
Attention, please. Thank you.
It's time to vote, and what we'd like you to do is to use the voting pads that you should have 1 each. And there are the 4 questions. Well, here's the question with the 4 possible answers. How useful would these processes of trajectory setting and the routines that Simon described be for you? Would they be A, not useful at all? So if you think it's not useful at all, you press A. B, possibly useful, I need to know some more. C, probably useful. I think this stuff is really interesting. Probably useful to me, but I need to know some more. Definitely useful, and I'm going to go back and get on with it. Which of those 4? Can you press now one of those 4 letters? Oh, fine.
Just had Ted Mitchell is a buddy of mine. He just said to say hello.
Oh, right,
Hi,
great,
Scott
yeah.
Hill.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Really, really good guy, yeah. Right, no, he's good. I do somebody of him.
So we've got the responses.
Can you get them up? Where's the guy?
Can we get it out?
Has everyone pressed? Okay, that's fine.
There we are.
Okay, so here's the picture.
Wow.
A few very sceptical guys who think, no, not for us. In the middle, about half of you sort of in the middle thinking, yeah, this is possibly or probably useful. Need to know some more. And quite an appetite, over half of you thinking, yes, this is definitely for us. We're going to go back and do some of this. I just wondered at this stage, there are people in the audience who are doing this now. Paul from Louisiana, you've been doing this. What's been useful for you in these routines?
You're just getting a microphone. Yeah.
Well, we've been very fortunate to work with Michael and his team over the last 3 months in Louisiana as the guinea pig for this exercise. And I have to tell you that we have mobilized people throughout the whole organization around our one goal that we've set, which is our 80% cohort graduation rate goal. And I think the most interesting thing on the slideshow that they presented to me when we did our first stock take is they had a picture of a cubicle on the floor 2 floors below me. It was a piece of paper taped to the side of the cubicle, and it said 6,900. That's the number of kids we need to get into our 2014 class increase over what we presently have in order to get to our 80% cohort graduation rate. So the point is that for our people in our organization, they are now becoming mobilized around this number. And for me, it's much, much easier to try to get a real handle on the material that we're trying to do and what are the strategies we're using, what's really working, because the analysis that's been done by our delivery unit, we have a very small group of people, 3 people who are working on this, has been worked out with the people who are in the programs and working on these kinds of things, and I don't have to tear through it all. It's now just presented to me in a much more digestible way, so extremely useful.
Thank you very much.
The only
Sorry?
No, that's why I was just going to comment on the results, because
what?
if 55% of you are going to go back and do it without any further assistance, which is the way Richard presented it, we think we can just end the session now.
I don't think it says without any further assistance, Michael. I think you've overinterpreted that. Let's turn to the second question we ask you, and that is, how challenging would trajectory building be? How challenging would it be for you? You say it's really useful. How challenging? Same thing. If you think it's really impossible, press A. If it's very challenging, press B. If it's somewhat challenging, C. And if it's pretty straightforward, D. Okay, press now.
Give him a time limit on the vote.
Okay. Couple more seconds for people to make their minds up. Okay, let's close the voting now. Okay. A somewhat different distribution this time. Again, a few very skeptical people say, actually, this is dead impossible. But a lot of people in the middle say, this is pretty challenging stuff for us, actually. So we are going to need some support if we're going to do this well. George, again from Mississippi, you've had experience at supporting Paul in actually doing this. What was it like for you, and what were the challenges that you faced?
Actually, Louisiana.
Louisiana, I beg your pardon.
I think there are a whole host of challenges. I think the key things I would advise any state that was interested in engaging this is you have to be utterly serious about human capital and getting the right staff dedicated to this full time, and you may not have those people in your building already, to be blunt. You may or you may not. We were fortunate to make one internal hire and had to essentially go outside the organization beyond that. The second key thing I would say, not to tell you something that you don't know, is for most of our SEAs, we have a long culture of a regulatory compliance organization. We are not a service delivery organization, most of us by design. And so one of the huge challenges is to get people in the organization to think in ways about being responsible for outcomes. Please hold me accountable for something that matters, not for moving another piece of paper. And then the other is quality of data, quality of analysis. We've had great supports. We've had some early wins. I tell some fun and exciting stories about staff actually volunteering to go out to schools and go see what's happening who haven't left our building in many a long year, and being interested in trying to problem solve to make their programs more effective, who've for many decades kind of seen their role as filling out forms, completing paperwork, complying with regulatory demands, and kind of that being the end of it. But I would say the biggest 3 challenges starting through is, unlike we have the linkage between we don't cook a meal, we don't teach a class, we don't drive a bus. So we've got to figure out how to pull our levers to influence the things where the kids really are, that the level of human capital it takes to execute on this really, not just to go through the form, but to really do it, is really very challenging. And then the third thing is personalization to your organization and your context is really, you need somebody thoughtfully thinking about, this is what worked in Great Britain. The fundamental concepts are probably the only thing that works. But how do I make it work in Louisiana? How do I make it work in Minnesota? How do I make it work in Michigan, where our leader, our constitutional authority, our structures, our relationships with the districts are a little bit different, and I've got to figure out how to leverage this as a way that causes one more kid to get across the stage in May. Or maybe in my case, 6,900, as we say, Boudreaux's and Amy's, walking across the stage hand in hand that wouldn't have gotten there if the state education agency hadn't done the right things.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, George. We have a pretty tight schedule, but this is an important issue. So if anybody wanted with the microphone, just we could take one or two comments or thoughts if you had a particular question. Anybody want to contribute? Don't feel obliged, but feel welcome. Okay. Well, in that case, I want to move on, but I just want to comment on this last vote. The 5% who said it was impossible, there are two things to say about that. One is, it really is impossible. And the reason it's impossible is, of course, you cannot predict the future with accuracy. That is not the point. If we could do that, we wouldn't need any of the debates we're having, because the future will be under control. It's never under control, is it? The point about doing this, about planning and building a trajectory, is not to be confident that you've predicted the future accurately. It's to feel that you've done the best in your professional judgment using the evidence you've got to predict the future, and then to track progress against that, and crucially, to learn as you go along. If you do a trajectory, every man's state, any state, all of our trajectories, they didn't work out exactly as we predicted. Of course they didn't. The important point was, because we had them, when we went off trajectory, we knew we were off the trajectory, and we began a debate. Well, what assumptions did we make that were wrong? What changed in the real world that we didn't anticipate? Which bit of implementation is weak? And because we had a trajectory and we were tracking progress, we learnt faster. And with big implementation tasks, the speed with which you learn is the fundamental message. It's the speed with which you learn. The sooner you know you're off track, the more you can do, the more room you've got to address the problem and deal with it. The second thing I'd say is, when you get a problem, we're coming on to this now, is when you get a problem, there are various ways of dealing with it. One is to, you get a kind of half-baked idea and you think, oh yeah, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. It almost always doesn't work. Blair used to say, always solve the problem rigorously, otherwise you'll have to keep coming back to it. So when you go off trajectory, which you will, look at the problem, learn fast, look for the solutions. So it's impossible, it really is impossible. So the 5% are right in that sense. It's impossible to be accurate about the future. The value of this is not being accurate, but being as accurate as you can be within our collective limited professional judgments, and then learning fast and acting early. The second thing to say about it being impossible is the alternative. Obviously, we've done it, so we know it's not impossible with the assumptions that I've taken. So those of you that thought it was impossible, it may be very, very difficult to do in your state, but some kind of planning ahead, some kind of prediction of where you might get to seems to me a worthwhile activity to think about. Now, in every man's state, actually, they did the trajectory, and you saw it before. They hadn't had Richard's contribution, so they were still using their rulers and on straight lines. But nevertheless, their trajectory was quite sound, and we're now going to roll the clock forward to 2013. And in 2013, what they can you switch computers so we get the presentation back on? Yeah, thank you. Excellent. So what they found in 2013, they still had their trajectory up to their college and career ready goal, which you saw before, but actual performance in 2013 was short of what they anticipated, exactly the situation that we were just discussing. So they were off trajectory in 2013, and they projected that if they stayed off trajectory in the same way, they'd miss their goal by a very significant amount. they'd be 6,100 students short of the goal. That's 6,100 lives fewer being fulfilled. That's a lot of Amy's, to use George's phrase, or whatever male equivalent of Amy you want to use. So that is a major challenge. They're not happy about that. It's 2013, they're already off track. They're not just going to wait and see whether their plans will actually turn out to correct themselves, because they've heard the Blair message that when you get a problem, you need to address it rigorously, otherwise you'll have to keep coming back to it. So they begin to have a think. They've just recently done the assessment framework that Simon described to you. And they go through their major programs that are designed, that you saw in the previous session, and they rank order them according to the likelihood of delivery. So you can see they've done the degree of challenge on the far side, the planning and performance management, the capacity to drive progress, what stage of delivery of that, their prediction of likelihood of delivery, and on mid-career math recruitment, they're confident that that will deliver. So they don't have a problem with that. And they go through the programs in rank order. And down the bottom, you see 3 that are graded amber red or red. So they've got 6 programs that are pretty much on track or definitely on track, and they've got 3 that are a cause of anxiety. As they're currently being implemented, those programs will not deliver the number of extra graduates in 2017 that they hoped for, and therefore they'll miss their target. The assessment review process that Simon described, he showed you the 4 headings, but behind that there is a 13 or 14-page document that tells you the questions to ask in each of the 4 headings. So it's a way of enabling you to think through whether a program's on track. And again, we can make that available. So when they did this in Everyman State, for the Saturday Academies, the first one that's amber red there, actually they went through it, and what they found on the Saturday Academies is that the real problem was, I suppose you'd call it a communication problem. The program was being put in place, but the purposes of it had been misunderstood out in the school system. George was talking about the long distance between your state education authority and the front line in a school. He talked about the importance of people getting out there and talking to the people in the schools, and that is important. But in this system, in Everyman State, they had introduced Saturday Academies, but they were being used in the school system as an enrichment activity for volunteer students, not as a catch-up activity for students who, without that activity, wouldn't graduate at high standards. And so there's a misunderstanding. So the program's in place, the money's being spent, a lot of people are actually enjoying it, so it's not going to be easy to correct it, but they know what the problem is, and the solution is to get better testing, diagnostic testing of who goes into that program, a better screening process, and a much better communication out through the system. Again, it won't be easy, but they know what the problem is, they know what the solution is. They don't need to do anything extra to find out the problem or the solution. The assessment review has given them that. Now they just have to implement it. Nobody thinks implementation is easy, but at least they know what they've got to do. Similarly, the one that was just below the Saturday Academies is this extended learning time. And here what they find is that they've extended the learning time, which should benefit the number of graduates ultimately. It should give that extra time that they wanted. But what they found through the assessment review process was that quite a lot of the students were bored. The teaching just was too boring, just not good enough. It was poor quality teaching. And so having even more poor quality teaching actually doesn't do a lot for learning outcomes. In fact, it's a real incentive to drop out. So, again, they know what the problem, it's not an easy problem to solve, but they have to recruit better teachers to do the extra learning time, the extended learning time, and they have to incentivize better teachers to do that. And of course, there's a professional development program to help teachers be good at it. So again, it's not an easy solution, but they do know what the solution is, and they just have to get on and implement the solution. So for those 2 things, they're obvious problems. They've identified them early because they're doing those regular 6-monthly reviews that Simon described. Through the review process, they've identified the solution, and then the review process will say to the relevant program holder, the owner of that program, right, 6 months from now, we want serious progress towards implementing this solution. So that will be the debate between the state chief and his delivery function and the program owner. And then when that review comes around 6 months later, there should be serious progress in implementing the solution. So that's fine. But the third one, the one that was at the bottom of the rank ordering that you saw, this is about high dropout rates. And here, the solution is not clear, because they obviously have to reduce dropout rates to achieve their graduation goals by 2017. And they have made some progress with this, but what they found is that the dropout rate hasn't fallen far enough, and it's still very high. And what's more, even though they've done the assessment review process that Simon described, they don't know why that is. It needs extra investigation. They don't say to themselves, oh, well, let's see what turns up in the next 6 months or a year and see if it corrects itself. They don't say that because, again, they remember the Blair admonishment that if you don't fix it now, it'll keep coming back to bite you in the future. And if they leave it like this and nothing gets better, they will be 2,200 students short of their target in 2017. That's a lot of lives, colleagues, so they're worried about that. And they decide they need to do something about it, which we'll come to later. Right now, I'm going to hand over to Richard, who's going to ask you another question. Or Simon, apologies.
So a bit of a cliffhanger then on the story of Everyman State. So 2 more questions for you now, this time about problem solving. 2 more questions for you. Firstly, how well equipped is your state to resolve significant problems where you cannot identify the root of the issue? And then secondly, for you, what is the biggest barrier to problem solving? 2 more questions. On your tables, focused conversation again. We'll give you 5 minutes this time. At the end of that 5 minutes, we'll do some more voting and have some more responses. So 5 minutes on your tables, those 2 questions, please.
All right, colleagues, time is up. I know 5 minutes seems like a short time, but 5 minutes may be a short time, but it was enough for Abraham Lincoln to deliver the Gettysburg Address. I think you should be well on track by now. Richard, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. It's time to vote again. 2 questions for you. The first question, how well equipped is your state to resolve such problems? If you think not at all, this seems pretty impossible, it's A. If you think you're quite poorly equipped, it's B. If you think you're somewhat equipped, it's C. And if you think you're well equipped as a state to solve similar problems to the one you've just heard, it's D. So just a moment's quiet reflection. Okay, vote now. Okay, everyone voted. Can we close the poll?
No, not yet. It's only 142 responses.
Okay, a couple of outliers again. Some of you, a small proportion, saying it would be impossible. We've actually got 6% who think, actually, we're in a pretty good shape here. So we've got small outliers, but the majority of you are saying, actually, somewhat equipped or poorly equipped. You like to do it, but actually not terribly equipped at the moment. Need some more support. Let's move straight on to the next question, because so many of you are in this territory. The next question, if you pull that up, is what are the biggest barriers that you face to problem solving? Is it A, lack of capacity? And by that, I think I really mean, have you got the right people with the right skills and the amount of time to do this job? B, limited access to or poor quality data. C, competing priorities. You've just got so much other stuff on your plate, you haven't got time to commit to this sort of problem solving. Or D, just inadequate systems and processes
Yeah, and can I say, I mean, in lots of parts of the British government, all of those problems would have applied. The question we're asking you is, which one is the biggest problem in your state? We know that in big bureaucracies all those things apply, but which is the biggest problem?
Okay, moment's reflection. Okay, time to vote. Okay, let's close the vote now. Ah. How interesting. You've got a sort of rather different distribution this time. Capacity, and we've got three quite equal bars around capacity, around competing priorities, and about inadequate systems and processes. The heartening thing is the thing that you absolutely must have to do this, data, is not coming out as the top priority or the top barrier in this.
I think that is interesting to me, and actually will be very encouraging to those of you that are hoping to get federal money because they're very keen on the data systems, and you're saying you've got them. But what I want to say about data, I'm just speaking of my own experience in the British Department of Education a few years back. We had lots of research, we had lots of data, but the way the place was organised at the beginning, the people who had the data never spoke to the people who made the decision. We didn't connect the data to the decision making. One of the virtues of trajectories and stock takes and monthly notes and all that routine stuff is it forces you to connect the data to the people who are making the decisions, to the people who are taking the actions, to the people who are managing the programs. And the second thing I want to say about the data is the data reveals a lot of problems. One of the things that determines success is how you respond to a problem. And we're going to come on to that in a minute. In some parts of the British government and in some parts of British history, people respond to problems by blaming everybody, firing everybody, having a big argument, and just occasionally that may be necessary. However, that's not the best way of getting these problems solved. And the best insight I ever heard on this subject was from the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. There's a British guy called Benjamin Zander. I don't know if any of you ever heard him present. It is a wonderful 2 or 3 hour change program, nearly as good as this one. And he says, his metaphor is, I'm a conductor of an orchestra, I don't play a single note. So how do I get my musicians? And that's very much what you're doing. You're like conductors of an orchestra, and you can have dissonance or you can have harmony. It's a question of how you do these things. Anyway, Benjamin Zander teaches a master class to people who play the cello. The best cellists in the United States go to Benjamin Zander's class. So by definition, they're absolutely brilliant. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in his class. So he gives them an A for the class at the beginning, so they can stop worrying about their grade. And then he says, right, this is about getting you to engage with your audience. And so the cellists play whatever cello things they play, and it all goes marvelously. And but every now and again when they're practicing, you can see I'm not an expert in music. The cellist bow slides off the string unexpectedly, crashes into the wooden bit of the cello, and makes a horrible grating noise. And according to Benjamin Zander, at that moment, the top cellists in the United States, without fail, always swear and yell at themselves. And he says, no, don't do that. Say, how fascinating. How did that happen? So we went around Whitehall when the data was off track, going, how fascinating. You're off trajectory. How fascinating. What are you going to do about it? How can we help you? What's the dialogue? So I leave you with Benjamin Zander's thought of going back to your states and saying, how fascinating, on a regular basis. Richard.
Yeah, Michael, I think Sally Vaughan, who is neither from Mississippi or Louisiana, but I think is from Michigan. Actually, I know Sally's been sort of leading the way in terms of college and career readiness. But I think Sally, you found there have been some particular challenges in terms of problem solving that you might just tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, the State Department of Michigan has gone from 2,200 staff members to about 300. And of those 300, 10 of them are full-time FTEs that are funded by state funds. The rest of them are all funded by federal dollars, which is probably not too atypical for many of you. So the challenge for us is obviously lack of capacity. What it has forced us to do, and it really reinforces the mentality of compliance and monitoring because they're all federally funded. So trying to step out of that box and do something different with so few people that have got state funding, which we've got flexibility to do some other things with. It's driven us to do a couple of things. One is to partner. You know, Jim Ballard, you talked this morning. He took the lead with training principals because we did not have the capacity at the department to do that. We also have what we call darkening the dotted lines. We have regional service agencies, and so we're building our partnerships with them because they've got the staff and the resources to do the kinds of things that we can't. So what we have also begun to do is to focus on what can we do that's high leverage, high impact, but low effort. One of the examples is our state superintendent just in the last couple of weeks issued a dropout challenge. We have no resources to help the districts with a dropout challenge, but what it's done is it's raised the importance of doing something at the district level. Then we're going to be able to report out to the media which districts have stepped up to the table to take on that challenge, so we can start to get some things going without a whole lot of effort on our part.
Okay, thanks very much. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, on that, by the way, you can see why the capacity is a major challenge in Michigan and no doubt many other states. And just implied in Sally's remarks is a whole issue about how the relationship between the state and the federal government works, which I think is going to be a major issue for the success of the reforms that Joanne and others from the federal department have been talking about. But that's an issue for another time. When we faced the kind of problem that we presented to you 5 minutes ago on Everyman State, where they've got a problem with their dropout rate, but they don't know what the solution is, we wanted a process to solve that kind of problem. And I realized quite early on we'd need some kind of problem-solving approach like that. And one of the reasons I recruited Richard, in fact, the main reason I recruited Richard, although later on I discovered he was multi-talented, but the main reason I recruited him was that he had been a very senior person in our school inspection agency, which is called the Office for Standards in Education. And they do school reviews, local authority, which is your equivalent of a school district reviews. So Richard was really expert in review processes. And for the 20 big priorities, we wanted something like a priority review. And so Richard came on board quite early on in the delivery unit's history to design the process. And he's going to describe not just how he designed it, but how it then worked. Richard.
Thank you, Michael. I remember the first review really clearly. It was 2002. It feels a bit like yesterday, actually. Michael came in with a gleam in his eye and said, I've been to see the Home Secretary. We've got a target to reduce street crime. We're on trajectory to increase it by 40% over the next 2 years. Time for a priority review. And later that day, I was in with senior officials from the Home Office and senior police officers from the Met.
What were they called? What were those policemen called?
Quick and Quinn. Bob Quick and Dick Quinn were the two senior inspectors in the Met Police who I worked this review out with. So that was the beginnings of our priority review process. In essence, it's actually a really straightforward process. And the real essence of it is speed. Because too many reviews that are carried out by government take 6 months, 12 months. We can't wait that long, basically. Children are failing, people are dying, whatever else is happening in our public services, we cannot wait that long. And we sort of figured that probably most of the learning and most of the understanding can be gained fairly quickly. It's driving out that last 5% that takes all the time. And actually, for most of the things we wanted to do, we didn't need the last 5%. 95% was good enough to go on. So we devised a set of these priority reviews that was designed to take about 4 to 6 weeks. And we used them over the big areas across our portfolio where we were off trajectory and we didn't really know the answers to why we were off trajectory.
Richard, can I just emphasise that point about speed is really important. Before Richard and I were working together and I was doing the education policy, I wanted to know whether our programme to increase elementary school literacy was really working. And I commissioned Ofsted, which Richard worked for, to do a review of that. And it started in September 98, and I wanted to know by the end of October whether it was working. They promised me a report in May of the following year. I said, that's too slow. But at that time, they couldn't do it faster. So what I did was not wait for the report. I just met the people who'd done the inspection at the end of October before they'd written anything. But they had the information I needed. So when we started the delivery unit, Richard was collapsing that, and as he says, getting the 90% answer or 95% answer in 6 weeks, rather than waiting for the 100% answer in 6 months or a year.
And in essence, it was a pretty straightforward process. The sort of steps are quite straightforward. First, identify the problem, and then keep the scope tight on it. We were asked to look at street robbery. We didn't want to get involved in analysing all other types of crime. We had to focus and scope it tight if we were to do it in the time scale that we had. And then it's about actually using and analysing the data that you've got to really begin to get your mind clear about what the big issues are. And that may involve segmenting your school data, so you know where the real problems lie. In the case of street crime, it was quite interesting because some of the key data was the big increase in street crime in England was in 11 to 16-year-olds committing street robbery. And that was the big increase. And immediately that sort of really focused the review very sharply. The other big piece of analysis he had was the international information, which told us that some countries and some cities had actually got to grips with this problem, and cities in the USA were a good example for us of areas where they had actually tackled and turned down street crime problems. So using the data and really understanding was a key part. And then it's about really identifying the delivery chain. And delivery chain is a really important concept to us. It's the chain, it's the link between you want to change the behaviour of professionals in the front line, that's your policy. What's the link between them doing that, teaching better, and giving children better life chances? What are the links in that chain? And in the case of Everyman State, it's probably something happening at the federal level, some people involved, some policies, some programs, something happening at the state level, something happening at a district level, and then something happening in the high school, which is going to change the behaviour of teachers, change the way they teach, improve the quality of teaching, and improve what children learn. And it's getting those links, getting who's responsible, what they do, and what's flowing along those delivery systems. Understanding that was really, really an important concept in our priority reviews. As we were doing this, the other really key thing in all of these was to build a team of people with the skill set to actually do the job that needed doing. And it needn't necessarily be a very big team, and you could bring people in. We brought in a head teacher when we wanted to do one on education. We built in an A&E surgeon when we did the one on emergency rooms. We brought in a police officer when we did the one on street crime. So it's to bring in the skills you need to understand the problems in the right sort of way. And it's also to build a partnership. We had to build a strong and trusting relationship with the departments we were working with. Potentially, we were a threat. We were potentially a threat to the people who we were working with. So we had to work very hard to build a strong partnership and work with them to arrive at a joint view about what the problems were and how they were going to be solved. And that was really important to us. Then it was about generating some initial hypotheses. Okay, so the problem might be about dropout students. One of the answers might be about graduation support for them. So what might some of the potential solutions be that we can test out as we go through this sort of process? So have something to guide you on these reviews. And then it was about generating the right questions. What are we going to ask people about? And then the real fun bit of this was the fieldwork, where we went out and talked to different people in the delivery system, got their views, got their understanding, asked them what's going well, what are the problems, what should be done about it, and always asking them 3 questions at the end. What 3 messages should I take back to Tony Blair? And when I brought back to him, what 3 messages do you want me to tell him? And that was quite a powerful way of ending an interview, and people really enjoyed and engaged with that sort of review. So this was the fun, this was the field work where we built up a really clear picture and then triangulated the evidence with what do we know from the data, What do we know for evaluations that have already been carried out? And what are our interviews telling us? And that built us up a really rich, rigorous picture of what the issues were and what needed to be done about it. Then it was about really analysing the evidence that we were getting in to get a really clear view of what the problem analysis was and how we're going to structure our solutions. And finally, it was about agreeing on the key actions. And we produced a report at the end of this process, and there were two things that were absolutely crucial. One is we got agreement with the partner department that we were working with that this was the right problem analysis and these were the right solutions. Because there's no way otherwise, if he'd have just handed a report over them that they didn't believe in, hadn't engaged with, and didn't believe these were the right way forward, that they'd have actually gone and implemented. So it had to get a combined view that this was the way forward. And the second key thing in all of this was actually getting this report really well structured, really clear, focusing on the really high leverage things that were going to make the difference and explaining them in crystal clear language to the Prime Minister and senior officials, ministers and other people concerned. So everyone was clear. These are the really important things that need to be done, and these are how we're going to do them. And we were looking last night at the one that we did on emergency rooms. It's about a 15-page PowerPoint slide pack with a 2-page cover note for the Prime Minister. And I can still remember quite clearly what the problem analysis was and what those 3 key actions that the department had to take if they were to actually achieve that A&E weighting target. So that's what it's about, partnership, and it's about clarity in achieving that.
We did about 20 or 25 of those together. What percentage do you think actually worked in terms of delivering a result, a change in the outcomes?
I think I'd say about 80%, Michael, of those that we did. The A&E one was definitely a really important factor.
Emergency room, yeah.
The emergency room one, in achieving which we achieved in 2004,
yeah,
and has been sustained ever since. So we achieved it. There was no bounce back. There was no fallback. We built as well as achieving the target, we'd also built the capacity in the system to sustain that really high level of improvement. So I think we're talking about an 80% success rate in terms of these reports having an impact within 3 to 6 months of completion.
And just one point, the team went out to the front line, as Richard was describing. How did you, if you turn up in an emergency room and there's a nurse there, and you say, you know, I'm a bureaucrat, I've come from Whitehall and I want to know what the problem is, why did they bother give you time of day? Why do they give you any attention? They're busy people trying to get people through an emergency room.
I think that's simple. And I think we had to make it clear that we recognised this was an important problem that was affecting them as professionals, but also, most importantly, the moral imperative to fix this in terms of people's experience of their National Health Service was so important that they would give the time to it. You have to know how to treat people with respect, you have to know how to use their time well, and you have to know how to focus the questions right in order to do that. And you also have to know how to respond to the questions, keep the interview semi-structured, give them the space and the time to say what they want to say, but make sure you get the clear messages about your issues and your priorities in that as well. But always, Michael, I think give me 3 messages for the Prime Minister was quite a sort of compelling offer to them to send their messages right back to the heart of government.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Richard. And actually, what we found generally when we went out to the front line, which we did a lot, always with the relevant people from the relevant departments, is actually people at the front line love being asked, because they've spent their lives having stuff dumped on them from Whitehall. And when somebody comes and says, well, what should we do? You can't stop them. They get going. And particularly when you say, as Richard said, what are the 3 main things you'd like us to take back to the Prime Minister? And they know you're going to take them back.
Can I just say one more thing, Michael?
They love them. Yeah, please do.
I should have finished by saying, and you may have gathered this from my tone, actually, there are 2 things about these reviews. They were really hard, actually. This was tough territory. But they were enormously rewarding, and they were great fun. Working in a team with people, solving problems together, was a really great experience, actually. It's really creative and partnership working. Great experience. But also, I guess when you take a deep breath and you think, I am contributing to solving some big problems, improving children's life chances, the moral dimension to it was really incredibly uplifting as well. So it was a great, tough, but a really great piece of territory to be in.
Okay, so 6 weeks, rigour, really good dialogue with people at the front line, and you find solutions almost always to the problems. 80%, Richard said, we delivered a report that had recommendations that changed the outcomes for the better within 3 to 6 months. So it's doable. The important thing is to have a focused team. If the people doing it are doing it as a small part of their day job, and then they've got a million other things to do, it never gets done. So you really got to get the focused team, and that requires some discipline. Now, in Everyman State, they with a bit of help from Richard, Everyman State has some nice golf courses, so Richard was willing to go, and he advised them a little bit, but actually they didn't need much help. They built a priority review, and they went through the priority review process in 5 weeks, and they, at the end of that, really understood their dropout problem that we were talking about 15 or 20 minutes ago. What they realized was that there were a number of problems, but by far the biggest, and the one that had grown the most, was students saying to them in a survey they did of students in the dropout program, they can't get the academic support they need to get through the program. So although they'd actually made progress in making the classes interesting, they had a real problem about the lack of academic support to the students. And because they weren't getting because the students weren't getting the necessary academic support at the right time, they were continuing to drop out. They combined that survey result with some interviews. And again, as you can see from the findings there, the interviews reinforced the message from the surveys, which was that the new dropouts, as it were, didn't feel the sense of support that would help them get through the very challenging career and college-ready curriculum. It's a tough thing to suddenly be asked to do Algebra 2. It's a tough thing to teach it, but it's a really tough thing for some of the students. And just the thought of it was putting them off. They needed more academic support, so they knew what the problem was. So then Everyman State, also as part of this review, obviously having identified the problem through the surveys and interviews, they then did something else. They went back to the 5 types of benchmarking. Through the 5 types of benchmarking, discovered 3 academic support initiatives around the United States that would help them solve their problems. Some of you will be familiar with these. They had graduation coaches, they had the skills prep camp, and they had this program called AVID. And what they decided to do as a result of the priority review was not just implement those pell-mell in a great rush. They decided that the following year, because after all, they've got till 2017, the following year, in 3 separate districts in Everyman State, they were going to pilot those 3 programs. They were going to test them out, see what impact they had. So they selected the 3 districts that are named there, gave them one of these programs each, and they tested them. And the result was that actually all of them worked, but one of them, the AVID program, worked twice as well as the others. And you can see the data on the screen. So by 2014, by the end of the 2013-14 academic year, they had identified 3 programs that worked and 1 that worked really well. Like all of you, Everyman State is resource constrained. So they decided, although all 3 of them worked, they selected the one that worked most and decided to roll it out statewide the following year. And it kind of worked. It worked very well in what they called the leader districts. Some districts adopted it, got a grip on it, implemented it really well. It had the right impact. Other districts were laggards. They didn't really get their head around it. They implemented it in name, but not in practice, and it didn't get the result they want. But Everyman State, because of its trajectories and its stock takes and its reviews, knew this was happening, and they learned from it, and they used the leader districts to inspire and sometimes to guide, mentor, coach the people running the same program in the laggard districts. So they ran them as a kind of community of people focusing on making that program work. And as a result of that, having been projected off track, as you saw at the beginning of this section of the presentation, now they found not only were they going to meet their goal, they were going to marginally exceed their goal by 2017. So they'd been through the review process of all their programs. They'd identified the 3 that were off track and weren't going to deliver. 2 of them, they knew what the solution was, and they implemented it. 1 of them, they didn't know what the solution was. They chose to do a priority review. The priority review explained the problem. It gave them 3 possible courses of action. They tested those. They selected the one that would work most effectively because they were resource constrained. They spread it around the state, but they didn't stop at that point because they know that when you implement across a big state, not all the districts implement well. There's a huge variation. They used the ones that were implementing best to help mentor, support, and coach the others. And as a result of that continuous process of implementation, they delivered their result with dramatic effect. So the question, I guess, for any other state is whether the everyman state model would work. I just want to show you that having got it back to projected on track, they did actually deliver the result. That was their projected. And by the way, we've followed the college and career ready stuff all the way through, but actually the cohort target was hit as well. Not only that, it had a major benefit for higher education. Higher education enrollment increased 9,500 as a result of the cohort graduation rate increasing. So that was a significant gain towards the President's goal for 2020. As a result of the college and career ready gains, another 12,300 students enrolled in college. As a result, total enrollment in college went from a baseline of 52,000 to a 73,800 number. So that's a big gain for higher education. I know many of you are higher education people in the room. So getting this graduation stuff right in high school, massive gains for higher education. Of course, though, what we know is to achieve the Obama goal for 2020 and to achieve the things that you all believe in the system, entry to college isn't the whole story. There's far too many students entering college and then dropping out. We know this is a huge problem around public higher education. What the model shows, though, is that completion also increased. As a result of the cohort graduation rate, it increased by 3,800 students from 33,300. As a result of the college and career-ready graduation, i.e. students much better prepared to benefit from going to college, it increased by 13,300, giving them a total gain of about 17,000, just over 17,000 extra graduations from college as a result of getting the high school part of this right. That is a huge gain, colleagues. What they then did, using the model, is work out, well, what is the benefit of that to the state's economy, of that progress through high school, into college, and completion of college. And the benefit just from the class of 2017, over the lifetime of that class, to the economy of every man's state was $7 billion. But they're going to get that $7 billion every year as cohorts go through. And if they keep improving after 2017, it will be even bigger, and the cumulative effect on the economy of the state will be absolutely enormous. But we know, and you know, that much though we're committed to the future of the American economy, or British economy, or the global economy, there's a moral imperative underlying this. This is about people's ability to make choices, to control their lives, to contribute to a democratic society, to be an influence in their community, to be fulfilled in life, work, and their community. If you all get right what you've embarked on by joining this network, it will be absolutely fantastic for this country. And by the way, those of us who live in other countries, we're desperate for America to succeed on this agenda. We know that the world benefits from a big, strong, generous America with a lot of very well-educated people. So we're rooting for you, whether we're here or whether we're back in London. So, and the leaders of that transformation are you, the people in this room now, and we wish you all the very best of luck, and we look forward to working with you and watching you pull off this major achievement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Fantastic. Thanks to all three of you. I have one quick question. If any of us were to go to your country and make this presentation, would we be as equally well received because of our accents? So I'm thinking of giving that a try.
Well, certainly
Yeah.
if you came from Louisiana, you'd be very
Excellent. Thank you. So actually, before we move on, I would like to ask you, Michael, if we did mention earlier that you may be going back overseas, but you actually are planning to spend some time here in this country helping us launch a new initiative to bring this experience into the States that are interested at both the K-12 and higher education level. Do you want to just talk for a minute about that before we move on? That would be terrific. Thanks.
Sure. As I said at the beginning, this is and I think everybody in this room believes this is a remarkable moment in America's educational history. It's a huge opportunity to bring about the kind of transformations that you've all been working for and engaged in. And there's a kind of a moment of standing on the brink thinking, can we pull this off? And because it's such a fantastic moment, I personally have felt very interested to spend time in this country over the last year. Not least because long ago I studied American history at university, and I followed the ups and downs of this country with great interest, and it's been fantastic spending a year here. And I've been working with Matt and Mike Cohen and other colleagues from Achieve, but also with Katie Haycock and colleagues from Ed Trust to work through, as Matt said at the beginning of this session, how could we take deliverology, translate it, as we're beginning to do, admittedly in a simplistic way for every man state, to translate it in a way that would help you do the job that you've got to do, assuming that you're able to get the commitment in your states to the implementation of college and career ready standards. So there's a very focused but absolutely crucial task of how do you enable all of you and the states you work in to implement these massive and massively important reforms. So we've been working away behind the scenes for 6 to 9 months with colleagues in Education Trust and Achieve with significant pro bono contribution from McKinsey to develop this thinking. And there are several strands to it. One is we're in the process of writing Deliverology 101, the handbook, or the field guide. And we hope to have that available within, I'll say a few months so as I don't raise expectations, but we've got a significant draft. So the kinds of things you've been hearing about and more written in a handbook. That will be something we want to translate into online materials as well. So that's one thing. Secondly, as you heard from Paul and George, we've been actually piloting this in Louisiana to see if this is something that is translatable and transferable into your context, doing your kind of things. I know all the 50 states are different, but we figured if we could make it work in one, that would be a good guide to whether we could translate it. And in each context it has to go into, whether it's the Dutch government or the Malaysian government or the Australian government or Louisiana, you have to adapt it to the immediate political circumstances. But that's been a really interesting pilot, and we've learned a lot from that. Thirdly, we have developed a kind of outline of an organization that we're giving the working title the Education Delivery Institute. And that's a collaborative venture between Ed Trust and Achieve and McKinsey. And if we can raise some funding for it, we will turn that into probably a not-for-profit that's independent but actually closely related to the organizations. We don't want another completely separate sort of source of advice. It needs to be coordinated with those things. By the way, we've created what that might look like. And what we envisage is that over time you could have kind of deliverology professional development opportunities for any state that wanted it, but also for a small number, and this depends on funding constraints, for a small number, significant in-depth support, such as we've been piloting in Louisiana, about how to crack through these things and implement the routines that Simon talked about, and so on. So that's the thinking we've done, and we hope that will all come through. But Matt, you've been part of this as well, so you might want to comment too.
Really fun to be able to work together with these guys over the last 6 to 8 months. This was just a little bit of a preview today. Our objective, we've been listening to what you've been saying about implementation challenges, and we thought this might be one small but important way if we can get this new organization going and bring this expertise here, but help to translate it into your contexts in the K-12 and higher education systems and in the US context, and get rid of those accents. If we could do that, we thought it could be a really important value add for you. Again, we're working with Ed Trust. They have the Access to Success Network with higher education systems that many of you are involved in that have set ambitious targets for increasing college completion and closing gaps. Just like in the K-12 systems, we're setting ambitious targets for graduating more kids college and career ready. So,
can I just add one more thing? If we,
Yep,
so,
go ahead.
the other thing is, which I should have said, is we've been out and visited states around the country and asked them whether something like this would help, and to CCSSO and people like that, and have got a positive response. And I think that what makes it distinctive is there are dozens of people in Washington and organizations offering policy advice of various sorts. There are very few, if any, that focus purely on how do we get this done. And there's no point having another thing that gives more policy advice at all. There's plenty of very, very good organizations doing that. This is about, you know what you want to do, you've decided that, you've got your advice from wherever it is, can we help you get that job done? And that's going to be a very tight, sharp focus on that.
Put it another way, a chief's given you a lot of advice about setting the policy, setting the bar. It's time to help you execute. And if we can get this off the ground, and if we get the sense of how many of you are interested, we think it could take us a long way. So, having said that, please let us know if this is of interest to you. Find us either after the meeting, email us. Please let me know, Lissa Peltzman, who's been very involved in organizing not only this entire meeting, but the specific session you just saw and a lot of the strategy around launching this. One of us would really like to hear from you if you're interested, and at the higher ed level as well, and we'll give that feedback back to Katie and others at the Ed Trust, because the more we understand the level of interest and demand, the greater the potential for getting this thing going and helping you. Michael, did you want to say?
I just wanted to add one more thing, not on the Shalini Anand, who's in the room, who built the model. I just wanted to thank her very much for the underlying work that went into that.
Yes, fantastic job. Now, I'm pleased to say that we're right on schedule. And if it's one thing I learned from Michael so far, he always said, plan for a certain amount of time, but always finish early. And for those of you who know me, that's not always my best trait. So we are on schedule, and we are about to go into a lunch period where there will be food out on the tables. You can bring it back in here and eat with your teams. Again, it's another opportunity for you to sit with your state teams if you'd like and spend a little time. Very importantly, at 12:45, we'll be doing our closing plenary. Just give me one more second of your time, if you could. Closing plenary, 12:45, on international benchmarking. We have a really good lineup for you. It's not just about case making on international benchmarking, it's practical ideas for how to learn from other countries on the very things you guys have been talking about. 12:45, we'll start the next plenary. Again, please join me in thanking our guests.
Thank you very much.